How are you?
Great, how are you? I could use some coffee though.
We used to have coffee. We don't get coffee anymore. So,
It wouldn't drag out.
are we good to go down there? Everybody? Alrighty. Good evening and welcome to the October 15th, 2015 Planning Commission meeting for the City of West Sacramento. Per tradition, we begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm going to ask Seamus this evening to begin us. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Anyone requesting to speak tonight, please fill out a form. It's about this big on the credenza on the side and hand it to the clerk over here, and she will pass it to me. If you wish to, unless you're an applicant, if you wish to speak on items that are on the agenda, please get those slips turned in before the end of the staff report, and I'll take those slips in order that I received them. First item is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the commission. I have no request to speak, but this would be the time that the commission could hear on items that are not on the agenda. Correspondence and staff communications from the Planning Commission Secretary. Mr. Tilley.
Yes, thank you, Chair Liebig. Just one item to note for the Planning Commission. You should have a memo in front of you from Mr. Laffey regarding agenda item number 2. And if you don't, we can certainly get you a copy.
Thank you. Disclosure of ex parte communications. Planning commissioners at this time should disclose any communications that they've had with.
I'm sorry, I just want to interject. Mr. Tilley, we are down one copy, so the commissioner and I can share, and we can maybe go and okay, thank you.
Thanks. Back to ex parte communications. Planning commissioners should disclose any communications they've had with applicants on items that are on the agenda at this time. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda, which is consideration and approval of the minutes from the October 1st, 2015 commission meeting.
I make a motion, we approve the minutes.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Moore, seconded by Commissioner Guerrero. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Abstentions? Okay, thank you, Alex. Motion carries. I didn't ask for nays, but that was unanimous. Regular agenda, public hearing regarding proposed conditional use permit for coffee roasting, packaging, warehousing, and wholesale sales at 980 F Street, Suite 20. Mr. Laffey.
Good evening, Chair Liebig and members of the commission. This item is for coffee roasting and packaging and warehouse wholesale sales at 980 F Street, Unit 20. We have some pictures up there showing this is their current location in Rockland, and they're moving to West Sacramento, or looking to move to West Sacramento. They are located in the northern building on the property. The memo in front of you has the revised exhibit. It's on the same lot as the southern building. Those two buildings are very similar. They both have a little office area up front and a warehouse area in the back with truck loading docks. The surrounding uses are industrial. There's the main line UP train track directly north of the location. So the reason for the use permit is coffee roasting isn't an identified use in the zoning matrix, so we classified it as a use unidentified, which is a conditional use, as well as wholesale warehousing is conditional in the C3 zone. So the volume that they do, the applicant mentioned that they do about 600,000 pounds of coffee a year, about 40,000 pounds a month, and they supply to Trader Joe's. And the applicant is here today, and They can answer any questions you may have. This concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Seamus. Are there any questions of staff before I open up the public hearing? No? Is the applicant prepared with a presentation or just simply to answer questions?
My
I don't-
understanding is, well, they can come up here and,
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you could start by just giving us your name. You might need there's a button at the base of the microphone, right at the base of the microphone. All right. Thanks, Cindy.
Oh, thanks. All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Gotcha.
Paul Phillips, I'm the owner, it's sole proprietorship. And we have made a decision, subject to your approval, to come to West Sacramento and consolidate 2 buildings into one with this square footage. And at the same time, we're lowering our rent. So 2 facets which, in today's economy, make life simpler. And to do that, of course, requires this conditional use permit that we're looking for today. We've been in business since 1994. We've been in Folsom. When we first started, we were in Orangevale for a while, and then we've been 12 years in Rockland. The lessor, Century Management, is our tenant manager in Rockland, and will be our tenant manager here. Same landlord. So we have a track record with them of rent on time, which is important, right? 12 years of that, so 3 different leases. So this is kind of a win-win right now, at least at this point. So, is there any questions you have for me?
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. I know it's a formality, but I need to open up the public comment period.
Sure.
Since we're standing there. Are there any questions of the applicant or of staff?
Just a comment.
Sure.
Just wanted to say thank you for selecting West Sacramento.
Yeah, well, it's, I think you're doing really well down here, growing-wise. It's so different than I've been used to. You know, I haven't been down here that much, and now I come down here a lot, and it's greatly changed, so.
That's great.
That's plus things for us, and I guess that's just the beginning of things going positive here, right? So,
Well, thank you. I look forward to potentially seeing your business here one day.
thank you.
So, okay, at this point, I will close the public comment period and bring it back to the commission if there are no further comments.
I'll just make a comment. So I hope to welcome you to West Sacramento very soon. Thank you for selecting our city. And my only comment is, comment or question, I'm curious if we are intending to be a food hub, in particular, we have a lot of industrial spaces, is it possible for us to look into, I don't know if the general plan's an appropriate time to do that, but looking into this type of business not requiring a CUP, if that's some sort of policy direction that the commissioners would share with me, such as, you know, food preparation or something like that. I don't know if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, in most of our industrial districts, a lot of food preparation is already
Right.
a lot of permitted use. The C3 zone is sort of that wobbler between an industrial district and a more retail district. And so when this use was brought to our attention by our economic development folks, you know, the site itself, you know, seemed to be reasonable for what it is they wish to do. It is somewhat of an industrial building already. So in that case is why we're entertaining this under the use not identified portion. But we do want to be looking at, when we update the zoning ordinance after the general plan is done, we want to be looking at all things food to make sure that we are entertaining them as the food hub concept has been laid out by the council.
Thank you for that.
I'm going to pause this for 1 second. I know I've closed the public hearing, but there's a member in the audience, Mr. English. Do you wish to speak on this item, or is it the next item? Okay, would you like to speak? Okay. Mr. Phillips, if I could ask you just to step aside. I'm going to go ahead and open up the public comment period. Just we have a limited audience, so Mr. English. If you could, please begin by stating your name.
Hi, Brian English with Century Management Company, and just wanted to come here to kind of support Safari Morning Coffee. They have been a tenant of ours in Rockland for the last 12 years. They've been an excellent tenant, and there was an opportunity for them to actually do some consolidation and to make their space a little more efficient. There were some features that they need in their operation, which is like a truck dock. They don't have one in Rockland. And we have a facility here in our West Sacramento Jefferson Industrial Park that all the components seem to fit real well for them to make their operation a lot more efficient. Plus, the rents are a little cheaper here in West Sacramento than they are up in Placer County, and so that had an impact as well. But they've been a great tenant, and we hope you grant the conditional use permit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. English. Okay, I'm going to reclose the public hearing. I agree with Bernadette's comments, and maybe the next time we have a zoning ordinance come up before us, we can take a look at whether or not this should be conditional or regular use. With that, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve staff recommendation for the conditional use permit for this purpose.
Moved by Commissioner Austin, seconded by Dr. Kelter. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Congratulations, and we look forward to seeing your business.
I'm glad it's approved before I say this, so there's some coffee here.
We will let staff,
Answered my wish.
Any interested party may appeal the decision of the planning commission in this matter to the city council by file a written appeal with the city clerk within 15 days of tonight's action, and that appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
yes,
Thank you.
I can smell it from up here. So, next item on the agenda is public hearing regarding tentative parcel map 5095 at 2107 and 2799 Del Monte Street and 1550 Harvard Boulevard. David, are you going to be taking this one?
Seamus will present this one also. I do not see the applicant for it here as of yet. However, if the commission would prefer, we still could proceed on this item, if that would be the commission's preference.
Unless we hear any objections as we move forward, I just suggest we proceed.
Okay.
He doesn't have to, and he's not here.
So this item requests approval of the parcel map to divide 1 7 1/3 acre property into 3 lots. The property is zoned M2 heavy industrial, and it's located east of Harbor and south of Del Monte. The site has already been built out and has 4 existing buildings, landscaping and parking. One of the buildings is located on this lot and the neighboring lot, and that's already existing. It has the property line going through the building. The map will create 2 lots that each have 1 building, and the eastern lot will have 2 buildings. One is its own building, and the other is the one that's on both this property and the neighboring property. All the proposed lots exceed the minimum lot size required, and this is categorically exempt from CEQA under Class 15. This concludes staff's presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right, thanks, Seamus. Formality-wise, I will open the public hearing. There are no requests to speak. I will close the public hearing. Are there any questions of staff? I have no questions either. All my questions were answered by staff prior to the meeting, so. With that, unless there are any objections, I'll look for a motion. I see hand waving, but I need
Move to
audible.
approve staff recommendation.
I will second it.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Guerrero, seconded by Commissioner Austin. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, please signify by saying nay. Hearing none, motion passes unanimously.
Any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission in this matter to the City Council by filing a written appeal with the city clerk within 10 days of tonight's action, and that appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
We've tightened the timeline. Okay. Moving on to item number 4, public workshop on General Plan 2035, draft natural and cultural resources, safety, and public facilities and services elements. Mr. Tilley.
If it would please the Planning Commission, I would like to go through this from the podium similarly to how we did it last time, if that will help. So I'm going to make my way up there.
Oh, plus it makes it look like there's somebody in the audience.
You can deliver it seated, that's okay too. Or just bring a chair up there.
Generally, I do prefer to be up here. I think I do better. It does appear to be coffee. So, thank you again for entertaining this, and on a fairly meaty item on a general plan update. After tonight, we will definitely be over the hump on bringing all of the proposed general plan elements to the Planning Commission. And so tonight, we want to take on three more important ones, much like how we did last time, and I'll be looking for your input on each one as we go, or we can come back to them as needed. So, here's a slide, please. So our natural and cultural resources element is gone by many names and many general plans. Many times it's called open space or conservation, things like that. But this is how we're proposing to look at this resources holistically. Cultural resources and natural resources, i.e. historic buildings, are meaningful in our community. They do add value to our community, and this element describes the city's policies and commitments to not only protect those resources, but also to enhance them. And it also strives to include the conservation of those resources while recognizing that the city, is and will continue to grow and grow significantly over time. So we have to find the balance there to allow us to achieve all of our objectives. So the general themes that go through this particular policy document address numerous biotic and also built and historic resources in our community. Agriculture does remain part of our heritage, but also part of our active part of our community. We have numerous still active working areas in agriculture. We have the urban farms that are putting a new spin on our historic agricultural areas, but we will remain having an agricultural component to our community. Biological resources, and sort of a subset of that is also our urban forestry program. We have many biological resources that we constantly study for. Swainson hawk is another one of them, but it's also habitat for a lot of different species in our community and in our adjacency to the bypass. We maintain a wide urban forestry program in our community. A healthy growing tree canopy provides shade. It provides carbon sink. It's a growing thing, and also trees are generally pleasant and nice to look at, but they provide a lot of functional purpose as well. Water quality resources, we have the ship channel, we have the rivers, we have our ditches. We need to maintain our water quality also as it relates back to stormwater. And this is another area where we look when we get to the public facilities element, how there's a relationship between these two functions. Energy use has been a big issue for a long time, and we're now being able to capture energy, not only energy use, but energy conservation objectives in our general plan, which we have not had to meet our more current thinking on that. Scenic resources, and also, and a very important thing that has been very important of late is some of our potential to have a lot of historic and archaeological resources. And an important subset of that is Native American consultation. There's been several bills that have been passed over the last 10 years. The city must comply with, most notably SB 18, which was done about 10 years ago, and then just this year, AB 52. We have a lot of responsibilities toward tribal consultation in our community. We have discovered, Native American artifacts in our community at various times over the years, and it is inevitable that we will find more as time goes by. So we want to make sure that we're consulting with the Native American tribes and working through the Native American Heritage Commission to make sure those things are done properly and with the right degree of respect for those resources. So would the commission like to discuss this element now and then move on to the other ones, or we come back to all three of them afterward? I have a couple of slides on each, and then it's up to the commission.
I like the way we approached it last time, where we went through all three elements
Okay.
and then came back and discussed one by one.
Okay. So safety, this is one of the 7 required elements in general plan, and safety is about broad level of protecting, the public health. So it addresses many, things on from a safety point of view of the community sort of as a whole. And this also includes a lot of the policies that this commission already reviewed and recommended approval for earlier this year under SB 5 that we put into our current general plan, and now we're carrying over into this element. So these are sort of the themes that this document addresses on a policy basis. Emergency preparedness, again, community-wide. The best way to deal with emergency is to be prepared for it. Flood hazards is a very obvious one. That's where all those SB 5 policies that we did before, we've carried over. We definitely remain on some level subject to seismic and geologic hazards, in our community. This also now relates back to some of our other elements we talked about last time, where climate change, and in this case, this is climate change from the standpoint of safety from the effects of climate change, needs to be accounted for. Resiliency. Many of the effects of climate change are, sea level rise, additional drought, many other things that can translate back into being a safety concern. And then the other core ones that are also very important to us, especially as we urbanize, air quality, hazardous materials, and noise. Noise is always a tricky one because from a safety standpoint is where noise levels can or could possibly be of a hazardous nature. This is not nuisance noise, the barking dog. This is, freeway traffic, industrial operations, railroads, airplanes flying overhead, all of those things that can be, if loud enough and of significant duration, can actually be hazardous. Public facilities and service. This is very much a nuts and bolts, basic infrastructure, public facilities that the city needs to have, and maintains to essentially have a functioning city. So these are all things that we must have to support our planned growth in the land use element. And these are all things that are, in many cases, addressed perhaps by other city departments, but this is all a part of, how cities actually operate. So in this case, we set up our overall policies to maintain master plans for our utility systems and how they're financed, which, leads into the capital improvement program. And we get into all those backbone things. So we have water treatment and conveyance. So that's, pumping it out of the river, treating it, and then pumping it around town. On the flip side of that, we have our wastewater collection and disposal. Stormwater drainage. This is important, and it relates back to the natural cultural resources element. The stormwater is important on here that it is addressed so that we don't have internal flooding, but then we also have a water quality objective for that, and that's why you see many of the ponds out there to get that stuff residence time. We need to be addressing solid waste and recycling. There's a lot of diversion goals. And now we're starting to get into also a couple of new areas that are very important we see as a part of our public infrastructure. Utilities had always been thought of as, power, gas, but now part of public infrastructure is very important is telecommunications, i.e. broadband. So we are definitely broadband deficient in many areas of our community, and so we want to make sure that we're making strides on that. Part of how we can do that is when we build new roads, we can make sure that we're putting conduit in for that, and then that conduit can be made available at a price to any telecommunication companies that are out there It's just as a way to try to help, feed areas of our community. I was surprised just the other day on this, that I was down at the bowling alley for a Chamber of Commerce event, and they were talking about how they don't even have cable there, right down the street in our core area of our community. I was really surprised by that. Schools and libraries, and then one important subset of this is police, fire, and emergency services. These sort of establish sort of broad goals, and some of those policies that come into police, fire are very important because those really become thresholds of significance in terms of response times, staffing levels, things like that, that do translate back into, land use decisions, especially on big projects. So we want to include those in the general plan, so it sort of establishes that as a sort of baseline, and then we rely on those for subsequent project decisions for our emergency services. So that's sort of, definitely a quick overview on these three elements. There's definitely a lot of sort of meat in between there, but we wanted to be sure to go over some of these themes, and at this time, we can start to get into some of the policies more directly, like we did last time, if that's your preference.
Thank you, David. We'll do it in the same order, tackle these in the same order that they were presented. First one being natural resources. I'm sorry, I have to actually get to that page. Natural and cultural resources element. Actually have quite a few in this one, although I'll start with, again, this is a well-crafted document. Thank you for incorporating comments that the commission has provided over the past several years. I did see prior comments reflected in this document, and again, cohesiveness across documents. So thank you. Well written, and is taking us in the direction we want to be. So I'll start on my left this time, looking for comments on the natural and cultural resources elements.
Just echo, wait, oh, do you want to start here?
No, go ahead, Bernadette.
I was talking first, I apologize. Yes, I just want to echo, thank you for doing an excellent job on this document. So I'll just kind of go in order. Let's see, so section 3.6, shading of new development. I just want to see, and this could be, I welcome other commissioners to weigh in on this, but I want to see if there is an interest in considering alternative urban greening measures. When you have infill development that has a particularly high floor area ratio or reduced parking, as is indicated in section 7.4, sometimes the shading is a little bit, their shading requirement is a little bit trickier to reach. So, as people kind of go in their order, I'd like folks to weigh in on that. Oh, I was talking about heat island reduction, sorry, that's what 7.4 talks about. So 3.6, shading of new development, just generally want to see if we want to look at alternative urban greening. 7.6, renewable energy in development. It indicates that the city shall require, to the extent feasible, new development to include renewable energy generation. I just wonder if we want to soften that language to something like encourage. Certainly, I think, I and the folks who are, involved in the city, are big proponents of renewable energy, but I worry about including something as strong as require in our general plan. And I would be interested in hearing, again, other commissioners weighing in on what their opinion on the economic impact of that might be. Section 9.3, historic districts. The city shall establish historic districts. So, again, I think that's a really noble goal. I really support the preservation efforts. But as you're probably aware, Mr. Tilley, that in establishing historic districts, depending on the type of designation, it can make it a little more difficult to do renovations or adaptive reuse. And I see that adaptive reuse is an area that we want to encourage. So there are different ways of addressing kind of historic districts. I don't think that we need to modify the general plan. I just wanted to make make a note of that. And then section 9.7 does specifically call out adaptive reuse. I'm aware of a couple of projects that would be doing something like this. And again, I'm very supportive of it, but just to kind of give you an example, some of the adaptive reuse that has happened in for example, downtown Sacramento, have not been to the level of historic preservation that would be required by historic districts. So for example, like the Citizen hotel renovation, adaptive reuse from an office building to a hotel, if it had been kind of a historic designation, we wouldn't have been able to, for example, build out the Grange in that space. So I just want to be really careful about all those things. So I just threw a lot of information at you. I
Well,
didn't give you
yeah.
a chance to respond.
No,
Should've
well,
given
no,
you-
everything you're saying on there is on par, and, you know, the details of how these things would be done will be, you know, really largely left to the specific plans of how they'll be done. I think a prime example of both of these is what we're doing with the firehouse, you know, currently, where certainly it was not going to be a fire station again, but we're certainly hope at least that the way we have put it together, that you're maintaining the historic integrity of the building from an architectural standpoint. If you look at it, even though it's going to be a restaurant, you could still see the big doors and the bell, that, hey, that probably looks like an old fire station. And you know what? It was. So that's a positive and very current example of, you know, what we'd like to see more of in town, not just on public buildings, but private buildings too.
That's it.
Thank you. Thanks. Dr. Kelter, do you have any comments on this section?
Only a few, thank you. Only a few. That one's even too small to mention. NCR 6.4 and 6.5, dealing with fleet vehicles and city purchasing. This is another one of these encourage, require issues. For this situation, it would make more sense to me to say require when feasible. Seems a little stronger than encourage to me. And on the next page, 7.2, I once had someone tell me, a developer actually, that one of the largest issues regarding energy consumption for construction of new buildings is transporting the building materials to the site.
Yes.
And I understand that adaptive reuse is wonderful when we can do it, but there are occasions, I imagine, when a building is demolished. Is there a reasonable way to encourage the use of the building materials that have just been demolished, like brickwork and perhaps some lumber and what have you?
At a minimum, I think at least 50% of the construction waste now has to be recycled. So, but that's not going as far as necessarily reusing it, you know,
Right.
on site. That's already in there. One of the things that we're working on right now, and we will bring to the Planning Commission at a, you know, later meeting is, there's the notion that, you know, maybe if those materials could be recycled locally and then made available locally, you're cutting down on the transportation of those materials. So there's that notion that, you know, maybe if those materials are accessible locally, where this came up with over in the Bridge District, when they were first getting started with construction and started to demo all those old concrete foundations over there, there just happened to be an existing concrete recycler over there who recycled that material, and they put it back into the road base right over there. So they almost didn't need to drive it anywhere.
Wow, that is perfect.
So we were fortunate on that situation. So we definitely will need to consider, because the transportation is a big deal, and that really adds up when you do the GHG analyses on projects.
And that's all I have, thank you.
Okay. Claudine, do you have any comments?
I didn't, I thought it was a pretty comprehensive document, very well.
Okay. on this side, the natural cultural resources. Sure.
The far right says.
Thank you for your comments.
Well, actually, I only have a couple on this, like everybody else, because I think it's a well-done document. And I don't know the answer to this, and that's 6.2. I was talking about the lead standards. And last time Bernadette talked about there were a bunch of other standards that might be better. And I assumed you were going to say something about that, or you missed it. But if you did, I just thought maybe that's something that we should consider, because I didn't know what the other standards were, but
No, that is a good point. We should have got something more in there from our last discussion, but lead does seem to be falling a little out of favor.
dealing with that whole section, talking about the city trying to, have trip reductions in fleet vehicles and all that. And I think that's a good thing to have in there, but we should also have a section where we're trying to encourage or help the community in general be able to do the same thing. And I just don't know how we do that also, but, and those were actually my only two comments.
Very quickly.
Okay. We're not in a hurry, though. but-
We're in no hurry. Could be here all
Speak for
night.
yourself. No. I wanted to follow up on Bernadette's comment regarding 7.6 and renewable energy in development. And I'm not really going to address her statement, but it made me think of if and where in this document are we going to address promotion of existing facilities and renewable energy generation. So rooftop solar, particularly I'd like to see something reflecting the city's stance on streamlining the process for permitting those things and making it easier for existing facilities to the extent possible. And I haven't seen that in an element yet, maybe it's in one that's coming or I missed it.
Fortunately, the state has done a lot of that for us already. I know the council just took up an ordinance on that with the building official a couple of meetings back that sort of reflects how the solar, permitting goes. And I already know that building already takes we had a lot of the solar, residential solar especially, those all go in their own pile and, they plow through those. So, there's tons and tons of those. There's 3-4 solar companies, cars parked out here all the time. So in many cases, a lot of that has occurred already. We don't even have discretion over ground-mounted solar arrays anymore. There's another legislative action.
And what about commercial and industrial renewable energy?
For solar, I mean, it's really the same thing, just on a much grander scale. We've seen a lot of significant solar installations in town that, you may not even, a lot of them, you can't even see from the grounds, you may not know they're there, but I mean, IKEA is probably the biggest one. I think Walmart did it too. And even Walgreens over here, and almost every gas station now has them on top of their canopy. So, we see a tremendous amount of that too. The other big one was Tony's Fine Foods did a huge installation a couple of years back. So we still see all those tremendously.
In terms of cogen, could you speak a little bit more to your thoughts on that?
Well, in many cases, some of those are, that's, where solar now can either, power your own home or it can go back, into the grid. We have had some folks that have actually put up windmills that are generating their own electricity from that. So, and even one of their projects was even looking at some type of thermal, community-wide thermal heat pump, concept that they're still, tinkering with. So that would produce, considerable amount of energy that could be put back into the system.
So I think I'd still like to suggest that we look at adding something, maybe it's a separate item about promoting not just solar, but other renewable energy technologies, particularly in our commercial and industrial sectors. There's a lot of new technology out there with using waste heat and converting that into energy, or using that to recycle or clean used water. And with the number of food processors we have, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And so just throwing that out there is something to think about in a different context.
Yeah, we have used this term renewable energy deliberately to try to capture, what we know in that sector for today, and also hopefully what is to come that we may not even know about yet.
Yeah, I think my challenge is, though, I haven't seen anywhere specifically point out existing facilities and the promotion of renewable energy adaptation, if you will, or upgrading.
That's good.
The 7.6 speaks specifically to new development.
Okay.
And then the only other comment I had was around 9.3 historic districts, only because this is also recent legislation. AB 189 now allows cities to create arts districts. So there's probably a lot more coming on that, but thinking about the diversity in some of our neighborhoods, it might be interesting to take the opportunity now to add something here about the promotion of arts districts as well.
Yeah, that's a good one there. Mona hasn't sent us anything on that one yet, so we're gonna need to look into that more, because we are looking at a pretty significant public art program on the Riverwalk, and there's definitely perhaps options, beyond that too.
That's all. Thank you very much, Mr. Tilley.
Thank you for your comments. Martha?
I wanted to expand on Commissioner Moore's comment related to 6.2, the LEED standards. And given that that is now becoming, little outdated, and it evolves, if it's possible to provide language that is referencing it but not being specific, if that's, so as time goes on and things change, maybe we can cover it with language that can capture anything that we find in the future.
Yeah, I mean, we probably want to maybe set up even like a performance standard that we want to achieve a certain level of efficiency over normal, and we left this one as is only because, it says we need to build it to LEED. It doesn't mean we need to get that, because that's really where the rub is on LEED, is the documentation to get that certification. It's very painstaking and very expensive. But it still would be a good goal to build to that correct standard anyway, even if you don't get the plaque on the wall.
And I appreciate all the comments made by my fellow commissioners. They were very good, and document was well written, and encompassed a lot of the factors here in our community that I've been observing. Looking at NCR 8.1, protecting scenic vistas, as we are expanding our pathways here in the city. I think a lot of our folks will really appreciate that. I myself do, as I'm out in the community running or whatever. It just makes our community a lot more enjoyable. And that's about it for me.
Okay, thanks. All right, well, I have a few in this section. I might have guessed I would, but the first section is agricultural resources. And I think we might want to update just the tone of the introduction a little bit to reflect the fact that we're transitioning now. We don't really have agriculture in the sense that we used to have it, 10, even 15 years ago. And even right now, because we have plans to develop on the largest chunks of ag down there. So what we have is rural residential and urban farms. And we haven't really hit on urban farms in this section, such as number 1.4, agricultural incentives. It would be nice to potentially add urban farms to this statement, such as to enhance the economic competitiveness of agriculture and urban farms, for example. This would reflect our communities transitioning to small farms, and reflects the fact that we're using open space or green fields for farming all the way up until the point of development. I agree with many other things in here. I have little stars for things that I like in it. And I will point out the promotion of use of native plants, especially valley oaks. That might have been one of my prior comments, so thank you. I want to hit on Bernadette's comments on number 3.6, shading of new development. I actually called this one out as well, but for a different reason. This one says that the city shall require the new development achieve 50% shading of constructed and paved surfaces within 5 years of completing construction. There's a little conflict there with 2.15 if you're promoting use of native plants, especially valley oaks, for example. You aren't going to get those plants to necessarily grow and shade 50% of a parking lot in 5 years. For that, they'll be using sweet gum or something, the spiky bulb trees. So I would support Bernadette's comments about alternative urban greening.
What does that mean?
Okay.
I don't know what it means.
Yeah, so, there's just simply shading of parking lots, right? Should I let you answer this, David? I'm sorry.
No, I think Charlie asked you,
Well, I'll tell you what I meant when I said it, I can say that. So there's, Chair Liebig kind of touched on that. There's certain requirements, there needs to be a certain required minimum of shading of parking lots. However, when you're building, especially certain, not more traditional residential commercial, but Bridge District or, some other areas like that, they may have very little parking, or they've kind of pushed how much they can build and go vertical on. And so what sometimes you find when you're developing these properties is that, in fact, you want to use native grasses or other plants that don't grow as tall and wouldn't meet the minimum shading requirements. However, the goal may not be necessarily shading, but preventing heat sink, which is, I think, 7.4. Well, not preventing, but reducing kind of, what is it, urban, I forget what the term is, urban something, heat island reduction. So things like green roofs, living walls, and native plantings are ways that you can still kind of offset. It's not gonna help with shading, but the intention really is to reduce heat sink. So things like that, cool roofs, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. And so when I say urban greening, I mean plants can grow all sorts of places, that we're still getting plants and we're still reducing heat island, we're achieving heat island reduction.
we really do need an urban version of this.
Yeah.
Because, we hope in our urban areas, we don't hope to see parking lots, in a sense. But we still have we still will have plenty of suburban development that will have some parking lots. So what we need to work on this with also is something we've been grappling with here at City Hall is if we end up putting solar out in the parking lot. Solar and trees don't jive too well.
Right, there's a lot.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, moving on to 5.1. I did see this concept come up in a couple places, but I think we could start reinforcing it a little bit more. The idea of recycling our water, our use of gray water in the city. I have some neighbors and friends who are considering using gray water at their homes for watering, even at their residential lots. It is really difficult to do that after your home is built. So for consideration while constructing, it's key, especially when the city has to put in special pipelines even for use of city gray water. It's complicated, so it has to be thought out in advance. So for this one, I would just add to the city shall partner with local, regional, and state agencies to encourage water conservation, recycling, and efficiency. Ditto other people, and that's it for me on this section.
Can I know, my third time talking. I don't know if this is the appropriate place for this, but the kind of Yolo County-wide preservation natural resource banking, is this something that would fit in here? I don't know where we
The
stand.
Habitat program.
Yeah,
That is in here. I forget offhand.
if it's addressed, that's okay.
Yeah, 2.2, Neural Natural Heritage Program. So basically says we need to continue working in that framework, which we intend to do.
Thank you.
That is moving forward currently, isn't it?
It is ever so slowly, but it is making progress.
That's how those things go.
This has been I think we're 20 years plus into that.
Slowly. Okay, any other comments on the natural and cultural resources? Alex?
I apologize, Mr. Chairman, I missed one. This is in 6.1. A minor point, but we presume that we and others are going to read the document. And I'm not sure I would want a reference to compact fluorescent specifically written into the document. I understand it's energy conserving, it's a disposal nightmare, and by the time we're actually ready to adopt the document, it may be on the way out. So,
I feel like it might already be. Yeah.
yeah.
For that
That's good.
matter, LED is also referenced in here, and I was thinking, 2035, huh? Who knows, you know?
Well, we do not want to wait till 2035 to look at this document again. We want to be working on it at least every, 4 or 5 years. Even if we don't change
you
anything, we at least
really?
want to look at it.
Poor David.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to safety. I'm sorry, the safety element update of the general plan. And I should have a coin, like, who wants to go first? Bernadette?
Oh, go ahead, get started with the guy. We're sick of hearing me.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so I had one comment, which is, it hits on 5 or 6 different paragraphs.
Okay.
So mostly, my concern was that the language throughout the document is that, if you look at 1.4, that's the exact language. The city shall make public information available to residents and businesses on disaster preparedness and emergency preparedness. Oh, can you guys hear me?
TV land can't.
Yes.
Okay, so I was referencing paragraph 1.4.
Mhm.
So the language in there says the city shall make public information available to residents, and this is throughout various paragraphs about there's maintaining various safety precautions, but then I think that the city should do a little bit more than just make information available. I feel like the city should inform the public. I don't know, the maintain was bothering me throughout this entire section. I don't think we necessarily need to be sending out newsletters and memos or any of that, but as far as disaster preparedness, and given that we are in a flood zone, I think there should be at least some sort of efforts made on informing the public of whatever these various plans are. So that, I wrote on a bunch of paragraphs, but that was the gist of the comment throughout the entire safety element.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna start calling on people then. Charlie?
Well, I don't have much on this. Mine are kind of generic questions, I guess. And I had 2.29. I was talking about levee trees. I thought at one point I read or heard somewhere that the Corps of Engineers said they were going to take all the trees out of the levee and then they were going to let some back in. And I still don't know what they're doing, but, and they may not know, David. I was
Yeah, it's
just
still
making it as a comment because you said we should have them on the levee.
Yeah, well, we certainly don't support denuding the levees as was what the Corps initially came out of DC, some couple of years back. And as reminding the commission, most of these flood policies, we've looked at and are in the general plan already. We looked at earlier this year. but we still have an opportunity to approve upon them with another, another chance.
So, are we supposed to have trees on the levee, or are we not supposed to have more?
Well,
Do
we,
not know?
we've considered that, that trees on, especially in the riparian corridor, to be important for habitat, and
I understand that.
And,
but
you know-
I just didn't know how that applied. That's okay.
I think it's still pending, I believe, with the Corps.
Then I'm back to 6.1, talking about hazardous materials and, trying to figure all of it out. And I don't know how much we do now. Do we have a guy like Bill Summers still working for the city?
Brian Johnson, who's our fire marshal, has really absorbed the role that Bill Summers used to do, and hazardous materials is more his background.
I mean, we were lucky as a city to have a gentleman like Bill Summers. This guy'd come into your business, and you didn't even know sometimes that you were doing something wrong, and he never did anything to you but tell you what your problem was. And then you'd make the correction, and there was no fine, there was no cost to this. He came in every year, went through every business, and he was the best thing I ever saw for the city, because sometimes people just don't know. And he was telling me a story how he found 2 chemicals in one little area, and we had an earthquake and they'd both fallen to the ground, it would have blown the building up. But if you put them in another section of the building, it didn't do any harm. And he was just such a knowledgeable man. I was just hoping that we still do that kind of stuff in the city, and that makes a big difference for this whole area and this whole implementation of it.
Yeah, fire has a whole program along this as part of their business license review when those come through. I know they do an inspection on all the businesses in town at least once a year. And, people call Brian all the time on these things, and he always will just go out there and, check it out. So he does a real good job on that.
I think that's all I have tonight. Thank
Okay.
you.
Any other comments on safety? Go ahead, Andrew.
So the first comment I'm kind of struggling with, but I want to make it anyway and get your thoughts. On the section dealing specifically with the levies, when you get into kind of 2.2 and continuing.
Yes.
So I understand the purpose of the safety element, and I understand the importance of the levies and all these specific pieces. However, I feel like we also need to consider using, consider putting something in here that talks about the levy as an asset and what that could mean for the city. One of the things that I know several of us have talked about is looking at the opportunity for levies for recreational use, trails, those kind of things. And I recognize this may not be the naturally thought of place to put a statement like that. However, because the safety element also covers public health, I think it could be an appropriate place to put something like that. And putting it with all the other pieces that deal with the levy system, I think makes a stronger statement about how important that is to the community. And it's certainly something that's important to me, thinking about all the levy work we're going to have done in the next decade. And knowing how many of the details still need to be figured out, and what my vision and what many others' vision is for what it looks like when it's done, as far as a place to recreate or trails for running, biking, those things.
No, that makes sense. We have some stuff elsewhere in the policy document about that, but it might be good to have something in here to sort of, make sure relate those, back. It's also important, we want to make sure those areas, don't become areas that where, if they're not accessible or, inappropriate things, may occur.
Right. The next item is on 5.5. So this item is part of goal S5, which is about air quality. But to me, the concept of health risk assessment is broader than just air pollutants. And actually, the statement even says, and sensitive receptors. So that could be, it's in my mind, health risk assessment covers air, water, hazardous waste in total. So I wonder if this could be a broader piece. And I don't know where it would fit because everything's kind of boxed in its own topic by category, but I just want to point that out as I think it might be a little broader than just air.
Yeah, this is making that term health risk assessment is a specific thing, type of, report that's done, and we've done a handful of them over the years. But we can broaden that potentially.
And then just, I'm sure you know this, but at the state level, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment puts out their cumulative impacts survey, which is what I thought about when I started reading this, but then it goes very specific to air, and so it may be worth considering making it a little broader to consider all environmental health impacts. And then the last comment, I believe, goes down to household hazardous waste collection. And I don't know if medical waste is, to me, that's different than household hazardous waste, but I thought this might be the section where we include that, because I know that's often something that ends up in waste streams that is dangerous for habitat and our water quality, and people have oftentimes a hard time disposing of.
No, that's actually, I think that fits right under household hazardous just fine. That's a good point. We should identify that.
I just know it's handled differently, and it's managed by the different regulatory scheme than than your spray bottles and things like that, so it may be worth calling out separately. And that was my last comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Martha, did
Oh,
you say you
sure.
have comments?
Yes, I do. In looking at 1.11, the employer plans, I was also thinking, maybe it's included somewhere, not here, but I was also, in the back of my mind, thinking, what about school districts, if an emergency happened, and the children were at school, do we know what the plans are for an emergency plan for, either evacuations or, something that happens during the day, as well as senior housing programs where you have a lot of vulnerable seniors that may need assistance and may tap our emergency resources for that assistance. And I don't know where that would fit, but when I read that, I thought maybe we should look at what emergency plans they might have. And they probably have it. I just don't know what they are, and how the city will work to make sure that they have it. In looking at the hazardous materials section, what crossed my mind was a spill. So, and I know we have a way to address cleanup, and so we do have a plan to maintain that, but I was looking for it here, and saying that we are just going to keep track of it. I didn't see it here, and I thought maybe it's somewhere else for hazardous
In terms
waste.
of how the fire department would respond to an actual incident, or?
I know they have it because we had a presentation one time in dealing with the trains and the storage of that, and they did reference that if there was, some kind of spill, that they would, that they could address it. But, and I think that's what I recall. Maybe that was what was going on in my mind, that they appeared that they would be able to deal with it. But if there was a hazardous material spill here in the city, and we just for feeling some level of assurance that would be addressed, a cleanup would be addressed, and we have a plan in place, or, what resources are we going to use? And just, those are some of the thoughts that crossed my mind when I looked at that.
Yeah, I think that level of detail is probably within the fire department's, operating, criteria and how they do things. But I'm still going over some of the stuff with fire, so maybe in the actual fire section, and when we get to the next, element, maybe
Sure.
we'll look at, hazmat response in there.
Okay. And those are all my comments.
Make a note of that.
Are there any on this side for safety? Okay. Go ahead.
First is section 1.6, emergency access and new development. I probably shared this with you, Mr. Tilley, before, but one of my pet peeves is that new developments are designed to be nice and wide, have nice wide driveways for nice big fire trucks to access them. And I just want to make sure that in accommodating what's outlined in 1.6, that we're really sensitive to how, not just that developments are created so they can accommodate fire, but also that fire, when they're reviewing plans, are taking into account the importance of smart growth principles. So.
Yeah, I have to say that as my career has gone on, it's the garbage truck that is killing,
Gardens is the other one.
killing much more so than the fire trucks on this stuff. It's, you know, they don't go in reverse, and they're one size only, it seems. I say that somewhat in jest and somewhat very seriously.
Yes. we talked about it before. So just, wanted to bring that up. I don't know if that warrants a modification there, but. Oh, my mic is not on.
No.
I apologize. Gotcha. So I think you've gotten the gist of my comments for that section. Section 2.6, flood insurance. It says encourage all residents. I wonder if we should say all property owners and residents, just so we can capture commercial properties as well, or if that's something that, I'm not that familiar. One would assume that commercial would also want to be encouraged to have flood insurance, particularly because we have so many important waterfront commercial developments. And then under 2.12, I think this is my last one, I think it's just maybe a spelling thing. The line says 100-year flood hazard area, minor, but it means something different. So that's actually it.
Alex, did you have any comments?
Well, I actually do have one, surprise even to me. 5.10 made me think of the issue of whether or not we have a potential or real problem with ships idling in port. I know port cities like Long Beach and Oakland have major programs to deal with ships that idle in port because of the quality of the fuel they usually use is very low. Do we have an issue about that here?
In a sense, we certainly can, because we don't have any shoreside power available to ships, at this point in time. We were working on a project with one of the tenants out there where the port was going to finally have that shoreside power made available. One of the things we've learned is that there's not uniformity, however, on the connection to the ship. The shoreside power is a start because you can't go anywhere without it. But there's not standardizing, I guess, if you will, of the plug on the ship end. But that is something that, ultimately the port, would strive to move toward, and we've raised it in some of the prior documents at the port.
Okay. I actually just have a couple on this one. 2.17, development in dam inundation areas. I'm guessing this is a holdover from something long past, or do they mean dam failure inundation map areas? We're below dams. We're on big rivers. I'm not actually seeing the need for this point at all, given that 2.8 covers flood risk. There's no dam below us. We're not going to flood when they fill the reservoir. So I don't understand that point, or if it's needed. Unless I'm misreading, but, okay. 2.41, floodplain capacity. The city uses roadways to convey floodwater, and it might be nice to actually acknowledge that. In some cases, we use roadways as egress, emergency egress, to get people out of the city. We want them out very fast. In some cases, there are roads that are higher and better for that, and in other cases, say Jefferson, that might go a little bit low, that would be a bad choice. If the break happens to happen there, but Jefferson would be a good flood conveyance right towards those, so I should say the lakes down there. But it, as well as to our pumps and things, so we could possibly acknowledge that we use roads.
Okay.
I did have a question regarding 4.1 greenhouse gas reduction targets. Do you know how we're doing on that? We're setting a kind of a goal of 30% below business as usual.
Yeah, I'd have to go back to the last inventory that we did and see where we're at. I don't have that in my head at the moment. But this is, I've left this in there in this manner because this remains a fluid target for us right now, because we need to do more work on the climate action plan itself, to get that to be as contemporary as it can be in a very evolving field. But I apologize, I don't have an answer on that for you at this moment.
Okay. I'm actually hoping we could exceed that. We seem to be doing a lot better recently, so it'd be nice if we could exceed that. It's tough because we were already built out, significantly built out anyway. That is not important. That's it for safety for me. Are there any other comments on safety? Head nods, nope. Moving on to public facilities and services element. Oh, I guess I have to call on somebody for comments. Andrew, go ahead.
So, Mr. Tilley, I only have a comment in regards to the utilities and telecommunications section. In particular, it's S6, or PFS 6. And I'm actually going to just broadly address the entire section. You mentioned broadband in the presentation. I know the city's been doing a lot of work on broadband. We know, as you mentioned, there is a challenge with broadband in the city, and just not just availability of service, but speed of service in several places. We worked with Yolo County recently, came out with a report that had several recommendations for our city. I don't feel like the subject of broadband in itself is addressed clearly enough and specifically enough in this document. And I'd like to go as far as suggesting that the city set a goal for broadband speed and capacity citywide. So, download and upload speed citywide and availability of access citywide as part of this general plan. And I think this area is the perfect place to do it. I'd also like to see a specific mention to the mapping of broadband availability in our city. Because unfortunately, the utility providers know where all their conduit is, but the city doesn't always necessarily know that. And so the ability to know what service we have where and how good it is critically important, not just to improve, but for when businesses are moving into different areas of the city and to support several of the goals that are in this section. So I just would like to see more specific focus and mention on broadband in those two areas.
Yeah, there is some more stuff in the economic development element. It doesn't go quite as far as what you're suggesting, but I think these are good ideas. Our objective here is about, getting this, getting the stuff, in the ground. And then the other part of it is about then what to do with that stuff, once it's in the ground. That's our number one holdback right now is, the fiber just doesn't go everywhere it needs to go. And that is a disadvantage, and especially for some of the large companies we've been trying to attract in some areas of town.
But to me, it's just not that there's fiber, it's that there's enough of it that can carry enough speed for enough users in our city, which is the next emerging issue. And I think there's several cities across the country who have made a best practice out of setting goals around what they want their broadband speed and reliability to be. And I think we should lead this region in doing something similar.
Okay. Anybody else on public facilities and the services element? No? Seeing head nod. Alex?
My comment is a general one in the law enforcement and crime prevention area. The introductory paragraph reads very nicely to me, but a lot of what it says doesn't seem to be represented by many or any specific points. I'm thinking, Father Greg Boyle in East LA is famous for saying the best way to stop a bullet is with a job. And I think it would behoove us to make a little more explicit reference to the relationship between crime prevention and economic development than I see here. Certainly, the emphasis on police and police services and gang suppression, I understand that. But to draw an analogy, if you break a leg skiing, you go to an orthopedic surgeon, but you don't go to the orthopedic surgeon so he can teach you how to prevent a broken leg. The response to a situation and the prevention of a situation can be quite different, as we all know. So I would encourage you to see if there's a way to make this whole chapter a little deeper and a little more broad in terms of the connections that we could try to make to do more crime prevention. It can't fall completely to the police.
And I think you're right, and, I think what you're also getting toward is, back to healthy community element, which is, to me, is really becoming the foundation for almost everything else, we're having in general plan at this point. So, but I like that notion, and want to look into that more.
Thank you.
Okay, I had a couple. Hitting on some of the same themes. First I wanted to point out 1.7 clustering. Bernadette did a great post today or yesterday on Facebook, where they put a senior center next to a high school, and used similar facilities because they found that they used very similar facilities. And we have something similar. We have with the rec center and our high school. It was just a great example. I wanted to note that. On 2.3, water conservation, just echoing that theme of including water recycling. 4.5, drainage plan. A lot of what we've worked on in the past is incorporating things like permeability, bioswales, instead of a complete focus on passing the water into stormwater channels, consider groundwater recharge at the same time. I have stars all over the technology stuff for Andrew, which he hit, so I will leave that alone. That is it for my public facilities and services elements. So, are there any other follow-up comments or things that we can do to pass on to staff? It was pretty thorough, so.
This has been another very good discussion. I appreciate it, and the commission, taking the time. I know this was a lot that, we gave you, but, this is what we need so we can try to, bolster some of this. So ultimately, we want to bring back the whole thing to the commission, and then, get some council input too on these set of policies. But I know the council is definitely counting on hearing what they hear from their commission.
Okay, before we adjourn, is there any informal discussion this evening?
With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to adjourn tonight's meeting in honor of Jimmy Vine, who is a longtime resident that just recently passed away.
Will do. Thank you. You moving around okay?
Me? Barely. I'll be getting worse from this point forward.
Yeah, you started getting worse like several months ago. You know, it's slow process.